Hello and bonjour. Today we take a look into data governance and ethics, where we shall review both the governance and ethical considerations to make when developing and implementing open data initiatives. Welcome on board. Open data governance refers to the set of principles, processes, policies, and structures that are put in place to manage, oversee, and facilitate the sharing, accessibility, and usability of open data. It involves the management of data to ensure its quality, accessibility, security, and ethical use while promoting transparency and maximizing its potential benefits to various stakeholders. Now, why does this matter and why is it important to be compliant on issues of open data governance? Open data governance aims to ensure that open data initiatives adhere to ethical standards, legal compliance, and the best practices while fostering an environment that is conducive to innovation, transparency, and collaboration. What are the current challenges in the information security space? Some of these challenges include, number one, the risk of deceiving identity of the sender. And one of the solutions to mitigate this is through authentication or using digital signatures. Another challenge or risk is the risk of changing information during transmission, the risk of denying a fact of information transmission, or even the risk of exposing information during transmission. And some of the ways we can address these solutions is to ensure that there's directory service, encryption, hashing, key management, and also non-repudiation. Now, let us talk about data governance and management principles. And I would like us to start by reviewing the CARE principles and their role in supporting data governance and ethics. The CARE principles of collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics complement the FAIR principles and are implemented in the data lifecycle. It is important for us to also remember that the CARE principles were designed to ensure the inclusivity of African issues, and that these two principles ensure that data is accurate, reliable, secure, and accessible when needed. What other principles should we consider when thinking about data governance and management? A key consideration should be in the areas of policies and standards. And here it's important for organizations to establish clear policies and guidelines, as well as standards for data collection, storage, sharing, and usage. These policies should also be able to define the scope, how to measure quality or assess quality, issues to do with licensing, metadata requirements, and other aspects necessary for the consistent and effective data management. Another element or principle to consider is data stewardship and ownership. And this involves defining roles, responsibilities, and ownership of open data practitioners within an ecosystem or within a value chain. The third is transparency and accessibility, which entails promoting transparency by making data sources, methodologies, and updates easily accessible. We must ensure that data is available in open formats and through user-friendly platforms that are easy to access and navigate by different stakeholders. Another principle to think about is quality assurance, and this means implementing mechanisms to ensure the quality and reliability of open data is guaranteed. This involves regular assessments, validation, maintenance of data to uphold its accuracy and relevance. Security and privacy is another principle to consider, and here the focus should be ensuring that different organizations that are implementing ODIs have their data secured and private, and that there is zero unauthorized access or data breaches. Engagement and collaboration is another principle to think about. And the focus here is on encouraging collaboration among stakeholders, including government agencies, civil society organizations, private sector, academia, and even CBOs. The final principle to think about is in regards to evaluation and improvement. And what this requires is to continuously evaluate the effectiveness and impact of your open data initiatives. What this will look like is ensuring that there's a dedicated effort towards monitoring the impact, monitoring the feedback and satisfaction levels of your different stakeholders, as well as in what ways are they utilizing the initiative. What is legal and what is ethical? Now let us shift gears and discuss what is legal and what is ethical. And how do you tell the difference, or where do you draw the line? Legal issues include compliance with data protection and privacy laws, intellectual property rights, contractual obligations, and regulatory requirements. Ethical issues, on the other hand, are concerned with ensuring that there is informed consent, protecting individuals' privacy, minimizing bias and discrimination, while promoting transparency and accountability. So what ethical considerations should we make in open data sharing? Number one is informed consent, and this simply means obtaining informed consent when collecting personal data and ensuring that the respondents clearly understand why their data is required and how their data is going to be used, and they even have the option to opt out when they want to. Number two is a fair use and non-discrimination. And this means ensuring fair and equitable access to data and avoiding discrimination or bias, whether it's during the collection process, the sharing, or the analysis process, to prevent unfair outcomes. Third is respect for cultural sensitivities. When we were discussing ODI implementation strategies and we focused on gender and cultural considerations, we really spent a bit of time there. But I just want to reinforce here and say that it's important to consider cultural norms and sensitivities when you're collecting data or sharing it, especially when dealing with indigenous or local knowledge. Finally, is accountability and integrity. Let's be honest, good practice demands that we always endeavor to maintain data accuracy, prevent misuse, and hold individuals or even organizations accountable for any ethical violations. We cannot be successful with our ODIs if there's no accountability and integrity, and therefore it's important to put in place measures that will enable us to detect and address any unethical practices. Let's talk about anonymization and the role it plays in ODIs. Anonymization is a process of removing or obscuring information from a data set that could be used to identify individuals, households, or businesses. Basically, making sure that what would ideally be personal data is no longer accessible. And therefore, anonymity is done to preserve and to protect the rights of the various data subjects. And it is an important element in data governance as it enables the sharing and analysis of sensitive data while minimizing the risk of re-identification. It also helps with research, especially in areas like public health, where specific sensitive data is required, but through anonymization, then it can be collected, analyzed, shared, and used. I want to highlight that poorly executed anonymization techniques can result in the re-identification of individuals whose data was collected. It can also result in de-identification failures, which eventually compromises individuals' privacy, and this will definitely lead to a mistrust in the initiative and consequently a failure of your open data initiative. Now, how do we balance openness, security, and privacy? Number one is to think about risk assessments and mitigation. 2 is to think about data protection measures. 3, we must have contextual awareness, and this is assessing the level of openness needed for each data set, as well as the level of openness that is convenient for various stakeholders. Transparency in security practices is something else to consider, as well as compliance with legal and regulatory frameworks. I need us to always remember that no open data initiative is above the law. So even if it's for public good, regardless of the scale and the scope and the kind of service that the initiative is going to provide to citizens, it must at all times be compliant with the legal and regulatory frameworks. Now, what lessons can we learn from Kenya's National Statistical Bureau, which is KNBS, about their approach to matters of ODIs? Number one is ethical consideration, and KNBS have been consistently vocal about ensuring that there's transparency in the way data is collected, in the way individuals are interviewed. There must be consent in safeguarding data and respecting the privacy of respondents, as well as in abiding by the laws and the regulations of the area in which the data is being collected. Another lesson from KNBS is on clarity and quality. And the things to note here is that it's important to use plain language and avoid double-barreled questions when either conducting interviews or doing questionnaires or surveys, because we want to make things simple for the respondents to be able to understand so that they can participate and be well informed when they're giving their consent. In terms of data entry, it's necessary to ensure that we validate that data and check the data accuracy. And some of the practices that are keys to ensure that before you release your data, you go back to your respondents and you do a validation check. Using numerical codes where possible to handle qualitative data entry is also key, because it helps you then summarize and analyze this qualitative data. It's also important to ensure that we avoid mixing data types. So whereas numerical codes are great, but ensure that you don't mix your text and your numerical, and there are clear differences on what is qualitative and what is quantitative. And then finally, it's also to pay attention so that you're not constantly missing values in your data, that your data is complete. The third lesson is on documentation, and what we've learned is that it's necessary to keep a record of the data collection process and all the processes through the data value chain. This is important because it helps the data producer remember the details on how the data was generated, how it was analyzed, what considerations were made, but also could there have been biases or could there have been gaps, and what can be done to avoid this or correct this. As I conclude, I would like to remind us of the following. In today's digital age, data is more than just numbers and statistics. It's really a powerful tool that can drive innovation, inform decisions, and improve lives. However, with great power also comes great responsibility, or should I say, greater responsibility. And so it's important that as we think about developing initiatives, we also think about creating the necessary frameworks and best practices that will support effective data management, as well as mitigate potential risks and pitfalls that could arise when data is mismanaged or it is misused. It is my hope that this session has been insightful and that you have a couple of things that you will be able to implement and that you'll be able to help you change and improve your governance and ethics on issues of open data.